Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, back to another edition of Real Spiritual Talk Radio. I am your host, Lamont Gates, once again bringing you the world of faith, metaphysicality, and spirituality. Today, my guest was able to recall her near-death experience later on in life, and it had an absolutely profound impact on her current life. Joining me today, ladies and gentlemen, is near-death experiencer Nicole Kerr. Nicole, welcome to Real Spiritual Talk Radio.
Well, thank you so much, Lamont. I am absolutely delighted, excited, and grateful to be here tonight with you.
Likewise, so am I, and I'm sure the listeners will be as well, rather the viewers, should I say. So, Nicole, I understand that your near-death experience really changed your worldview. Is that so?
Absolutely, especially my view of God.
Okay, all right. Now, speaking of God, why don't we start with the very first question? What was religion and or spirituality like for you growing up, or at least prior to your near-death experience?
Well, I will tell you, I grew up in the Bible Belt, and that would be Jackson, Mississippi, and all of the South. So church was a fundamental cornerstone of our life. And I had parents, one who was Southern Baptist and one who was Missouri Synod Lutheran. So we got to go to two churches. So when people say to me, what was the worst thing about church? I said, there was so much of it because we had to go to two different churches. And if you know the Southern Baptist Church, they're really about, the duality of God and, here are the rules. And if you're good, this is going to happen to you. It's kind of like, I call it a vending machine concept of God. If you put in the right behavior and you hit the Coca-Cola button, boom, out should come the Coke, right? But what happens when you hit Coke and a Mountain Dew comes out? Whose fault is that, And then what if you hit it and nothing comes out? It's always on you. You've done something wrong. And so the other part we learned in the Baptist church that there was something called hell and that God could get mad at you and God's wrath would come on you and he would judge you and he would punish you somehow. And you could be separated from your family for eternal life. And so that scared the wee out of all of us in the 5-6-year-old category there, when we first start going to Sunday school. So I think what it really did was instill a lot of fear in us about God and kind of created this persona of a human that lives up in the sky somewhere, the old man with the white beard who's just watching everything, including your thoughts, which as a young kid, you're like, I can't even control my thoughts. But we spent a lot of time in church. I went to Bible drill. I did all of that. And then I was also at the Lutheran church. So I'm learning not only the Bible, but Luther's small catechism, going through confirmation. And let me tell you, these two churches are telling you, okay, there's a God, but here are different ways to get to God. And they're each the right way. So not only was I confused, but God must have been confused. And I'm not even talking about the Methodists or the Presbyterians or the rest of the different denominations and their rules on how to get to God. And so it was very much something we had to do. We had to sit with our dad. We couldn't sit with friends. And the favorite part of the show I call it the show in the Baptist church, because those ministers were, man, they were on. But I loved watching people get dunked in the baptism tank. I thought that was the most entertaining part of it. But anyway, so those are those kind of fundamental imprints that I got as a kid. So when I went off to the Air Force Academy, because I'm such a people pleaser, and my dad had wanted one of his 4 kids to go follow in his footsteps and be, go to the Air Force Academy. And they had just started admitting women in 1976. So my class was 86. The first class graduated 80. So I was relatively one of the new classes with women. So the beginning of my sophomore year is when I was in a car crash, and it was at a squadron function. There was alcohol being served, and I got there late, and I got a ride back with a senior who I didn't know. I knew he had been drinking, but I didn't know how much. And he wanted to stop on the way back to have some more at another bar. And I'm going, okay, you have to remember, I never dated in high school. My dad was that conservative. So now I'm at school with 4,000 guys, and his rules are no dating cadets, no smoking, and no drinking. So this guy's like, here, have a couple beers, Nicole. And I'm like, oh, okay, I'm going to have some fun. Here's a cigarette. Well, I'll try that. And then the bartender was like, hey, are you okay to drive? And he's like, yeah. So Corvette convertible, 1965, man, I'm hot, right? So he says, do you want to go park the car and look at the Rocky Mountains? And I'm like, we got to get back to the academy, or we're going to get some demerits. We got to be back by 7:35. It did not dawn on me that he had set this up the whole time, that he was trying to make out with me and he was going to get me intoxicated. That never dawned on me until he tried to make a sexual pass at me. And I said, no, we got to get back now. And then I remember getting back on the road, and that's all I remember until I woke up in the ICU at Penrose Community Hospital, and I was pronounced dead at the scene. Okay, I will show you. And in my book called You Are Deathless, I even have some pictures, and I don't know if your audience can see that picture, but that is a 65 Corvette convertible. That was the parking lot they took it to.
Certainly a wreck there, yes.
Yes, passenger side. And then it made the front page of the paper, which I always would have liked to done, but not that way. And that's the volunteer fire department plus the regular fire department that got there. They're all working on me to resuscitate me. When they got there about 10 to 15 minutes later, I had been covered up with a blanket, and one EMT, John Hartling, said to the bystanders, because it was the bystanders who couldn't get any pulse or anything from me when they made the call to 911. They went in and got a blanket and covered me up. And he said, nobody makes that call but me. And he took the blanket off, and he couldn't get any vitals. So he did something called a sternal knuckle press, which elicits pain in the body. And my right eyelid flickered and my pupil dilated. And at that moment, Lamont, my soul came back through my eye. Now, what do we say about our eyes? Our eyes are what? The window to the soul, right?
Right,
Have
absolutely.
you heard that?
Absolutely,
yes.
Correct.
So my soul had left me when I was flying out of the car. It went up and left me down there as a corpse. And then when he started working on me, it came back in through my eye, and he was able to get a blood pressure 60/0. Okay, so that's pretty much barely hanging on. CPR the whole way to the hospital. They didn't think I was going to make it that night. I had lost so much blood. I was just several fractures. I was a mess, and I detail it in the book a lot. And I just want to take one little section that I want to read to everyone, that when I remembered my accident 19 years later, coming out of Starbucks, I got in my car to go to work, and all of a sudden my brain just remembered exactly how I was sitting in the car. And then the rest of the memory just kept coming after that. Now, why it took 19 years, that I think was I had to be safe in my body for all this trauma to come up. Otherwise, I think I probably would have wound up in a psychiatric ward if I had to deal with all of that then. But this is a part of the book where I remembered, and I say, I go to my chiropractor and I sit and I wait for him all day to see me. And so as I'm lying there, he's got his hands on me on different acupressure points. I am spinning around insanely fast, like those tilt-a-whirl carnival rides, grabbing the side of the car door. I scream as my side of the car smashes head on into something. What is it? I realize I can't stop anything, and my voice fades. I fly out of my seat through the windshield. Around me, glass is shattering like splatter paint. I feel pieces of it cutting into my thighs and legs. God, this hurts. And then something slices my left foot. Bad. I try to shield my face with my hand, my mouth wide open under it. Then I'm in the air for what feels like forever. When I finally hit the ground, I understand that I am going to die. My mind freezes. I scream, "Oh my God, help me." Then I have one final thought. I'm not going to make it. And I didn't. And when I flew through the air, that's when I called it Casper the Ghost in the book, but I now know it was an angel. It was my grandfather on my father's side. He came and he got my soul and took it up with him. And I went to this level, I guess is the best way to explain it, where I could look down, I could see my body was in a ditch. I could see it was a corpse. It was just lying there. I could tell exactly what I had on. And I was like, oh boy, that's bad. But up where I was that white light that was the only thing that I had remembered since the crash. That was the only detail, was bright white light, and not a blinding light, a clear light. And Dr. Raymond Moody, who coined the term near-death experience, said that is the most common NDE occurrence, is this either tunnel or just bright white clear light. And if you think about white light, it's actually made up of all the colors of the rainbow because it contains all the wavelengths. So you're in this cocoon of this energy of just brilliance and love and beauty. And I'm up there with this my angel, who's my grandfather, but he's not 58 years old, the age he was when he died. He was more like in his early 30s. And, you know, none of his flaws were there or evident. He was an alcoholic. None of that even was brought up, you know. He was just this beautiful 33-year-old angel that I could recognize. And so there were other beings there. I could hear them. They weren't speaking English. I don't know how I heard and understood it, but I did. We're all energy. It could have been telepathy. It could have been whatever. But they were very clear that one of the messages was to tell people to make sure they ask the angelic realm for help, that they will not just dive in and help you unless you're asked by them. So that's really important, because we have something in our society called free will. So you're going to go about your life, and unless you say, angels, please help me with XYZ, they're not, unless it is life or death, which was my situation. And then they just came right in. So that's the first message, is to remember to ask for help. They are there. They want to help us. They're anxious to help us, but they want us to ask, which makes sense. And I know people think, you know, people are crazy when they say, oh, I'm going to ask the angel for a parking space. But dadgummit, they get a parking space, you know? I mean, there's nothing too small or too big to ask. It may not be the result you want, but you will get an answer, and you will start developing the relationship with the spiritual realm, which it's there and they can communicate, but we have to be willing to suspend our disbelief about it and be open to messages that come across. And they can come in all different kinds of forms, but they are souls and spirits and guides that want to help us. And then the other message he gave me is, he told me I was going back in my body, and I was like, no, I do not want to go back in my body, because I knew the minute I got back in that body, Lamont, it was going to be pain and suffering. And I was going to go back to being an infant, because I had broken so many bones. And, you know, it was at death's door. and I'm going right back into the Baptist church and the Lutheran church and the way it was. And that was not my truth anymore. From what I experienced up there, it was all just colors that are not even in the Crayola color box. Okay. So, music, it's just, death is absolute beauty. It's light and loving kindness on the other side. And my own experience and hundreds of thousands of other people, that is their experience as well. And that's why in my book, I talk about the 10 common lessons of NDE, which is in their annual report from 2020. And they're all positive. Okay. Positive about death. The first one is you do not die. Your energy body opens up and your soul and your spirit leave it. And that is what goes on. And if you look at somebody who's dead, who's in a casket, they don't look the same as they did in person. I don't care how good the cosmetologist is to make them look like they used to look. They just don't look that same because they don't have that life force in them. And that is what brings them to life and animates them. And, it's a really contrast when you see them and they just look, oh, that doesn't look like my mom, or that doesn't look like who my friend. But my message was, you're going to tell people not to be afraid of death. And I'm like, well, that's a big message. And I'm like, how am I supposed to do that? And this is 19 years later. Okay. So I've spent the last 20 years trying to figure out what that means and how that looks. And then finally spending 13 years on my book to write about it and try to explain to people why you are deathless. And that is because your soul is eternal. It has many, many lives. This is not your first rodeo. And yes, your physical vessel dies, decays, but your soul, that radiance, that light, that is what lives on. And that is what connects with the other souls up there.
I want to go back. You did answer a number of questions that I had yet to ask, but the main question I want to talk to you about is this 19-year later recollection. A lot of people have had near-death experiences. People have been clinically dead and they've been resuscitated, and they would say, I didn't experience anything. I've heard about these near-death experiences, but when I had my heart attack, they resuscitated me, and it was just like a light switch being on and then turning off and then turning back on. Perhaps the reason why they did not, quote unquote, experience anything is maybe because they didn't get to recall it yet the way you have. For 19 years, you probably thought that they turned the light on and turned the light off and then turned it back on until you were able to retrieve the memory from somewhere out inside of you.
That's right. Your hippocampus stores the memory. But I will tell you, your body holds the story. It keeps the score. And if you're not feeling safe, your body is not going to allow that memory to come up, because if you're already traumatized and you're already like reacting to life, like out of your amygdala, that those two almond shaped parts of your brain that sit back here that are responsible for going into fight, flight, fear, freeze. And this part of your brain up here is your prefrontal cortex. And what that does is help you make intellectual executive decisions. But if you get triggered by something and you don't know what it is, this part of the brain, that amygdala, hijacks it. And you cannot rationally, intellectually think your way out of something, because you are right back in that trauma. And that's why PTSD is so hard, is because you keep going back to that trauma. And it's having to get out of that loop, reprogramming that loop. And they've got new ways of doing that now, but it is extremely, you tend to live with a lot of anxiety. It changes your world. I'm very sensitive, and most people that have had an NDE are very sensitive to loud music, to stimulants, to toxins, to noise. My husband is a musician, and I'm like, we finally converted the garage into his music studio because I'm like, I can't think, and he's just like, I'm not playing that loud. And I'm like, yes, you are. So anyway, I can't, alcoholic beverages. Oh, I would love a glass of wine, but unfortunately it does not agree with me. Cigarette smoke, I can smell it a mile away. I mean, I'm so super sensitive to things like that. So it makes it hard to live with somebody sometimes who's experienced that and really has to, no, I'm not going to be going to rock concerts. If you want to go, take some of your guy friends, and so that's a commonality that you find with a lot of people with NDEs. But the repressed memory, that part to me is a safety issue. Your body has to know that it has support and resources, and you feel safe in order for it to come up.
So again, you're not the only person to have recalled a near-death experience. I have read several near-death experiences where an individual would have recalled it later on, and I thought back then, wow, that's interesting that they could go that long without remembering something as fantastic as a near-death experience. But obviously, these things do occur, and you're yet another witness to this. We talked earlier about religion, and you talked about going to various churches and being raised in the Bible Belt South. After your near-death experience, so what does religion now look like to you?
Now, I know a lot of people can still do spirituality, and I mean, they can go to church and still have their own concept of God and still participate in rituals that they find comforting. And I applaud that. I have only found one church in Texas, in San Antonio, that I thought I joined because it connected with who I am. And it was based on social justice. It was about equality for all. They fed the homeless. I mean, they acted on the principles that Jesus puts forward. And I see Jesus as a way shower, and I'm always saying, man, if we could all just act like Jesus, and the biggest hurdle for most people in churches, to me, is the hypocrisy, is the judgment. They judge you for being gay. They judge you for this, and this. And I'm like, there's none of that goes on the other side. There is no judgment. How freeing is that? There is no list of keeping bad things about you. That's all keeps you in fear. And fear is a very low vibration. And when you're in fear, you're going to be back here in your brain again. You're not going to be making rational decisions that are for your highest and greatest good.
Absolutely soothing words coming from someone who's experienced the other side. So why don't you tell us the name of your book again and where we can find it?
Okay, it's called You Are Deathless, and it's a near-death experience taught me how to fully live and not fear death. And it's on Amazon, it's on Barnes & Noble. You can order it from independent bookstores. It became a bestseller. I will tell you, it's been out since late August. And I think I talk about so many different pieces of life that it connects to almost anybody. It talks about family. My family, my parents are religious addicts. They live in Australia. And unfortunately, they don't believe anything that I experienced. And so I now have no relationship with them. And that, is so hard, but I can't be around somebody who is going to judge and criticize me and try to create more fear in my life. I know what I know, and it is so soothing to know that when you cross over, that all these wonderful things happen, and they are all positive. And it is, I'm doing an Audible. There's 12 chapters and I'm on chapter 9. So I hope to have that out sometime in April. So for that 30% of the market that doesn't want to read the book, It's I have a paperback and I have a hardback, but it's $9.99. So what is that? A venti frappuccino and a croissant or something? There's the book. And I do book clubs. If your book club chooses to read it, I will Zoom in if it's a time zone that I can accommodate, and I will talk to your book club. Or if it's in driving distance, I'll drive over and sit in on your book club and answer any questions. And I will tell you, you will learn more about the people in your book club from answering the questions in this book and doing the fear checklist, and truly get to know someone on an intimate spiritual level like you never have. And we all are going to face this. This is not anybody that gets excluded. And it's a lot of souls are choosing to leave the planet right now. And a lot of people are having to deal with this. So I wrote the book to help you with your fears about death, to support you through the loss of loved ones. And may my book inspire you to live fully, freely, with your heart and your hands wide open.
Absolutely wonderful. And Nicole, I want to thank you for coming on Real Spiritual Talk Radio and sharing with us your absolutely fascinating account.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And my website is www.nicolekerr.com. If you want to go there, I'll send you the first free chapter. You can look at it and see if this is something you want. But I put my heart and soul in it. I was honest. I spoke about stuff that people that knew me go, I never knew that you suffered from an eating disorder. And I said, well, I never got any mental help because Mom told me Jesus and God were going to help me. And, Jesus didn't sit down and have a therapy session with me, so my pain had to go somewhere. So it went into compulsive eating.
Well, now you can sort of be that therapy that people need who fear death or have a curiosity about what's going on the other side, what's really going on the other side.
Yeah.
And with that said, Nicole, once again, thank you for coming on Real Spiritual Talk Radio.
Well, thank you so much. I've truly enjoyed our conversation, and I just wish everyone love of themselves first and peace on our world.
Ladies and gentlemen, Nicole Kerr.